J-Dubb here. So, the other day I was realizing that I haven't seen a Looney Tunes cartoon in years. But then it got me thinking about another question I've had ever since I was a kid. What is the difference between Looney Tunes and Merrie Melodies? If you grew up watching Looney Tunes like I did, really, it's 2014. Who keeps anvils lying around? Anyways, if you grew up watching Warner Brothers cartoons in syndication on TV like me, you probably noticed that sometimes in the title part where it would normally say Looney Tunes, it said Merrie Melodies instead. And you may have wondered why. These days, the Warner Brothers characters, Bugs Bunny, Porky Pig, Donald Duck, just seeing if you were paying attention, all these characters generally seem to be placed under the title Looney Tunes, and they generally seem to be associated with that tune, do 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 do. But if you watched enough of these cartoons as a kid, you probably also noticed that just as often they would be featured by a different tune. But that's really all kind of a result of a meshing together of different things. So the whole thing began in 1929 when Disney decided to produce a series of short animations intended to feature different pieces of music, which they called Silly Symphonies. These shorts would be shown in movie theaters prior to the feature presentation. So in lieu of the success of Disney with Silly Symphonies, Warner Brothers decided to do the same thing to feature Warner Brothers music and called it Looney Tunes. So Warner Brothers hired a couple of animators named Rudolph Ising and Hugh Harman, who came up with this character named Bosco, and for a couple years they produced these Bosco cartoons under the name Looney Tunes. So a couple years later, it's 1931, and Looney Tunes producer Leon Schlesinger decided to produce a second series of similar cartoons called Merrie Melodies. So Warner Brothers owned two different animation studios producing similar types of animation. Then in 1933, Harman and Ising left Warner Brothers and went to MGM, taking with them all the licensing to Bosco. So Warner Brothers hired some new animators and developed an all-new character named Buddy. Only Buddy wasn't so popular, and in my research I discovered why Buddy wasn't so popular. This is really bad. So after trying to hang on to Buddy for a couple years, Warner Brothers finally gave up the ghost and created a new character called Beans the Cat. Beans did relatively well, but in one of the Beans cartoons there was a particular pig character who Warner Brothers noticed that people seemed to like, so they brought back this pig character in other cartoons and eventually phased out Beans the Cat, and Porky the Pig became the lead Looney Tunes character. So Porky was a big success, as you can probably tell by the fact that Porky still exists in the whole Looney Tunes group. And eventually they created a sidekick for Porky named Daffy Duck, who came to overshadow Porky, and eventually they swapped, and Porky became the sidekick for Daffy. The iconic theme music was introduced in 1937, where the Looney Tunes theme was actually the merry-go-round broke down, which is the which is interesting because the iconic do 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 that we associate with Looney Tunes is actually the Merrie Melodies theme. Then in 1940, Merrie Melodies decided to introduce a character who would become a recurring character, which they called Bugs Bunny, who in the beginning was kind of more of a rabbit version of Daffy Duck and sounded like Woody Woodpecker. But it's also interesting to note that the character who we now see as the star of Looney Tunes was originally introduced as a Merrie Melodies character. Along the way, Bugs Bunny became the more laid-back Bugs that we think of, and by 1944, Bugs was put in a Looney Tunes cartoon for the first time. Eventually, they began featuring Merrie Melodies characters in Looney Tunes cartoons, and Looney Tunes characters in Merrie Melodies cartoons, and it all sort of became arbitrary whether it was a Merrie Melodies or a Looney Tunes cartoon. Then in 1969, Warner Brothers stopped producing their Looney Tunes and Merrie Melodies theatrical shorts, and everything involving the Looney Tunes cartoon characters since then has just generally always been referred to as Looney Tunes. And, well, that's about it. J-Dubb out. Bleep. That's all, folks.
Basically,
now I'm a cow. A month or so ago, I was driving back to Portland from Seattle.
J-Dubb! The FBI's on your slave labor operations and the producers are freaking out!
Time out.